Hey, how are you doing? This is George Whitten. It is March 28th, 2023. The title of this episode is The Star Spangled Banner, Eclipses, and the Red Heifer Shabbat. There's a lot to cover. Before I get started, I just encourage you to visit Worthy News. Go ahead and get our app. It's a great app. And not only do you follow Worthy News, but you can follow 50 different news sources instantaneously. And also, our only social platform that we're really posting on regularly is Telegram. Just find it very uncensored. It's a very easy way to keep people up to date quickly. And we also added a few chat channels, so if you want to have some interaction, you have some questions as we go throughout. So I just encourage you to sign up. There's a lot to cover. The week, well, before I get started, I do talk about prophecy. But I'm not a doom and gloomer. It's not the end of the world. It's the beginning of a kingdom. Prophecy was to go ahead and encourage people, to speak to people about the ability and encouragement, comfort, to really exhort them to understand this season that we're in so that we can be activated to what we're calling to do. Now, the week kind of started very interesting. On Friday, Netanyahu, this is last Friday, Netanyahu told Anthony Blinken and basically the Biden administration that if we have to go into Rafah, we'll go ahead and go into Rafah with or without you. And this is interesting because this is happening at the feast of Purim. Purim is the festival where the Jews were forced to defend themselves. And what a lot of people don't understand is as the Jews were forced to defend themselves, in the book of Esther, we read that many people joined themselves to the Jews because they saw that God was with them. Then on Purim, on Monday, the UN was able to pass through a UN ceasefire resolution. Now, the problem wasn't with the resolution itself calling for ceasefires, that it wasn't attached to the release of hostages. And so this actually showed a very strong break between the Biden administration and the Netanyahu government. And immediately Netanyahu called off the delegation that was scheduled to come to the United States this week. And so that was actually a very, very big deal. Now, continuing on the week, it was kind of an interesting week because this Friday, or tomorrow actually, is the Shabbat of the Red Heifer. And what this simply is the Shabbat that the Torah cycle talks about the red heifer. Now, before I get started, there's been a lot of confusion. And what happened was CBS did a documentary, and in the documentary, they showed this altar, and they said the temple altar is prepared. Well, actually, this is actually a reenactment. It's not an altar made of stone, and the altar has to be made of stone. This is actually in the Jordan Valley, and it's only for reenactments and for educational purposes. So that's one kind of error that I see all over the place, all over the web. A lot of people just don't investigate to find out the actual truth. The next thing that happened this week was on actually yesterday, so Wednesday, Israel had a conference. And then the conference was about 3 hours long. I watched quite a bit of it. It was in Hebrew. I didn't see any English subtitles. But in the video, it was interesting. They actually showed the red heifers. They kind of did this little tour of the red heifers. And from what I saw, they're all still alive. So nothing has been sacrificed as of yet. But what's interesting is the Shabbat of the red heifer is going to fall on Good Friday. The celebration that a lot of Christians are going to go ahead around the world and they're going to observe, the death of Yeshua and the death of Jesus and also the resurrection this Sunday. But what the Torah portions this week are Leviticus 6 through Leviticus 8, and then the passage in Numbers 19 is actually the passage. It's actually a supplemental Torah passage that details the red heifer and the sacrifice of the red heifer. And then also in this passage is actually a Haftorah, or a reading of the prophets. And this particular prophecy is actually in Ezekiel 36. And Ezekiel 36, covers the restoration of Israel. So for those that are not familiar, Numbers 19 is basically finding a red heifer without spot or blemish that hasn't had any yoke, it hasn't been used for work. And then the way that the sacrifices would take place was cedar with hyssop, scarlet, put in the midst of a burning. And then you take the ashes of that and you run it through running water and you put it into a vessel. And that's the purification process. This is not the abomination of desolation. This is actually the sacrifice that the Jewish people believe is necessary in order to conduct temple ritual services. So that's just another error that I see a lot. The other thing that happens is the other passage that's read by a lot of people is the Ezekiel 36 passage. And the Ezekiel 36 passage, I'm just pointing out a snippet of this. And if you notice here, the whole reason why God restores Israel, the Jewish people, is not who they are. It's who God is. Paul says in Romans 8, who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall famines, distress, perils. And he goes through this whole list. And his proof is, and you can read it in Romans 9 through 11, it's that if God hasn't cast away the Jewish people, he's not going to break his promise to you. And so that's what Paul uses to prove that the love that we have with God is eternal. But in this passage, if you read it here, it says how the nations, that the Jewish people had profaned the name of God. And then it says that he's going to use Israel to show the nations that he's still God. And in this passage in verse 25, it says, and I will sprinkle clean waters on you, you shall be clean. So there's a lot of people that look at this as, this is connected to the red heifer. Take it for what it is. But the main thing is this. And I will give you a new heart, and I will put a new spirit within you. And I shall take away the stony heart of your flesh, and I will give you a heart. The stony heart out of your flesh, and I will give you a heart of flesh. So this is really talking about a born again moment. Obviously, it's not connected to the red heifer. It's actually their connection of knowing who Yeshua is, who Jesus is. But this is coming. And, prophetically speaking, we're now entering into a very interesting phase. Now, this particular week was a kind of a bizarre week in America. We were actually scheduled to come back to Baltimore this week. The interesting thing is, since we've been redeployed to America, I've been to Minneapolis just a week or so after George Floyd. I was in Seattle with the Chaz and Chad riots. I was in Portland with the Antifa riots. And now I'm back here in Baltimore when, obviously, this ship container. And there's really a lot of speculation, a lot of things being said right now. There's speculation that, that someone tapped into the internet and changed the ship's course. I actually heard someone that was on a very conspiratorial type radio show who is very knowledgeable, said that this is actually an older ship and it isn't actually controlled that way. So, not to throw a smoke in it, but he said that this thick smoke was the sense that they tried to flood the engine, try to get the engine to turn on. Apparently, the ship was going way too fast. The second thing that was interesting was there was no tugboats. And I saw several people that are former Coast Guard, describing the process that there should have been tugboats. And I actually read the timeline. The tugboats departed from this particular ship about 15 minutes before this accident. Now, a lot of people are saying, the captain is the problem. Well, actually, every ship that is navigating through a port is actually assigned a pilot, actually someone that actually knows the waters inside and out. So there's a lot of people saying, it's the captain's fault. Well, actually, technically speaking, we haven't found out the investigation yet, but there should have been a pilot on board that was knowledgeable of the Baltimore waters, knowledgeable of how to navigate this particular current, navigate the channel. And so there's a lot of questions about this. I know there's a lot of speculation that this was done by nefarious means, that this was a terrorist attack, and I hear everything. But really the point is this, that God allowed it to happen. Now, it happened within 24 hours of when the Biden administration actually left Israel under the rug. Basically, some people say, well, that's a connection judgment. Look, I don't think there's anything that's not a God incidence, that God isn't working. And It reminds me about a month ago, well, actually about 2 months ago, that a Turkish MP, this Knesset, this leader of the parliament, went up and slammed Israel and started cursing Israel, and then he died of a heart attack right on stage. It's kind of that same scenario that I see. And so there's a lot of things that you have to understand. I grew up in Baltimore, so Baltimore has a really rich history. This particular, another thing that's been said is that I actually heard President Biden say, I've been all across this bridge many times on a train. There's no train on this bridge. It's actually a very narrow bridge. I actually never liked driving on the bridge because as you drive on, the bridge actually like shakes. This is actually the only bridge that is used to navigate hazardous materials. If you look at this map, 695, you see the Francis Scott Key in exclamation red. That's actually called the Beltway, and it's actually 695, and it goes around Baltimore just like a circle. And in the circle, there's 95, which is the corridor that connects Florida all the way to Maine. So this is a main corridor, and there's actually two tunnels. The one tunnel is 895, and the other tunnel is just 95. Both of those tunnels are very close to Fort McHenry, and that's where the Star Spangled Banner was written. Now, the Francis Scott Key Bridge is named after the author of the Star Spangled Banner, and this location is the bridge that goes over that portion of the Chesapeake Bay that only that hazmat trucks can go over. They're not allowed to go through the tunnels. So this is going to change kind of the driving dynamics around Baltimore because they'll have to either go around or they'll just have to change the way all routing's done. The other thing is that Baltimore's harbor is actually one of the biggest exporters of automobiles, the biggest importers of automobiles. The Domino's sugar factory is here, so there's a huge amount of sugar that actually is imported here that is processed at the Domino's sugar factory. It's actually a fairly busy port, and so this is actually going to cost billions upon billions of dollars. The bridge itself, they say it's going to be $600 million. It's going to take, the Lord will probably come back before the bridge, just to be realistic. So, but I have to say that the timing of this is interesting because of the eclipses and the things that are happening. And I want to talk a little bit about that, but I want to take you back in a little bit of history. The very first deaths of the Civil War actually didn't happen, in a war. It actually happened on the riots on Pratt Street. Now, Pratt Street in Baltimore is where the iconic Inner Harbor is. It's the place that Mayor Donald Schaefer had just rebuilt. It was something that was completely decadent in the 1980s, and they just created this harbor, and it became this really beautiful attraction. And then all of a sudden, everything from that was building up because the two stadiums, where the Orioles play, Camden Yards, and M&T Stadium, where the Baltimore Ravens play, are within probably not even a mile from this location. And what happened in this riot was, as South Carolina succeeded, not all the other not all the states had all succeeded at the same time. There was actually votes taking place that Lincoln called on militias in different states to come down and to protect the White House. Now, at that time, Maryland was a slave state, but Maryland also had a really strong abolitionist society. It was really a state in conflict. Most people don't realize that Baltimore actually had one of the largest populations of freed slaves in the nation. About 25,000 freed slaves were in Baltimore City when this riot took place. And so at this time, soldiers from the militia got into a very strong disagreement with some people that obviously the state was still a slave state, and so there was a great separation. Now, if Maryland and Baltimore had gone to decide to succeed, then Washington, D.C., the capital of where Lincoln's residence was, would have been completely surrounded, and you could see how that was a problem. So immediately thereafter, Lincoln actually imposed martial law. He actually sent General Benjamin Butler to enter into Baltimore. He did it during a thunderstorm. He took Federal Hill. Federal Hill is the location that It's called Federal Hill because this is where all the residents, the night the Star Spangled Banner was being written, the residents actually sat on Federal Hill watching the battle between the warships firing their cannonballs and Fort McHenry, which is, probably half mile from Federal Hill. And so they go ahead and they seize Federal Hill. And what's interesting is that the Maryland had voted against secession 2 weeks prior, but Lincoln was so concerned that he had actually made an order that the writ of habeas corpus was removed. And a writ of habeas corpus is that you have to actually have charges brought against you before you can go to jail. Well, they actually were arresting. And it was interesting. They arrested the mayor of Baltimore, the city council, the police commissioner, the entire board of police, and they were arrested in prison in Fort McHenry. The place, where quote unquote freedom was shouted out. The War of 1812 was when the Star Spangled Banner was written. And so, within 50 years or so, this is what's happening. And one of the people that was arrested was a guy named Captain John Merriman. Now, Merriman actually, this brought on a court case before the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court then said that the President and the constitutional laws of the United States cannot suspend the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus, nor authorize any military officer to do so. And you would have thought this would have caused a major issue. But actually, Lincoln just ignored the Supreme Court ruling. Just ignored it. And when he ignored it, what happened was, the freedom of the press. And a newspaper editor, Frank Key Hedward, which was actually Francis Scott Key's grandson, wrote an editorial, and he was thrown in jail. And not only was he thrown in jail, but they arrested, two publishers of his books were arrested. 9 newspapers were shut down in Maryland by the federal government. A dozen newspaper owners and editors were imprisoned. So, the thing about freedom of the press, we think today we don't have any freedom of the press. And so that's what took place at that time. And then later on, you had a situation where, they were in such crazy, I want to go back here. They were in such crazy turmoil, but we can start seeing the connections today. How, Supreme Court decisions are just ignored, court decisions are just ignored, and as though they have a higher authority. There is no checks and balances. And the interesting thing is that this is coming at the time of the eclipse. And the eclipse, many people have marked how this has been connected to civil wars. And now we have this horrific accident happen at Francis Scott Key Bridge, at a place where the very first people that died in the Civil War, really the start of the Civil War. And Maryland was, a state that was in turmoil. Is this connected to a civil war? Now, what's interesting is I ran across another article. I didn't talk about this in any other videos, but in this article, it talks about how NASA is going to fire 3 rockets at the solar eclipse. And what's interesting, they're going to sign these 3 rockets. And what's really bizarre isn't they're firing 3 rockets, but they're named it APEP, APEP, which is stands for atmospheric penetrations around the eclipse path. Well, anyway, APEP is named after a serpent deity in ancient Egyptian mythology, and it is the nemesis of the sun deity Ra. So they're literally doing this experiment, and they've named it after a serpent deity. I would have thought to myself they would have done something different, but hey, this is the sign of the times. It's very interesting. Obviously, the eclipse is going to cross. It's going to form an X. I talked about this in a previous episode, that this is actually the ancient Hebrew letter Tav. It's actually connected to the cross. And while many people are, I've done different videos talking about how this is going to go across 7 Jerichos. It's initially going to go through Jonah. It's going to go through the beginning of where the big standoff is that's happening in Eagle Pass, Texas. There's a lot of things that this is implying. But another thing that's actually happening is that the National Guard's being, ushered out in huge numbers for this eclipse. So while many people are really focused on civil war, I want to take it back to 1861. At that time, not only was there civil war, but there was actually what was called the Layman's Revival. And the Layman's Revival was actually a huge revival. It was led by D.L. Moody, and it was led by a lot of the young Baptist preachers that had an understanding of the baptism of the Holy Spirit. And it's a very interesting dynamic. I believe that's coming again. And the reason why I say that is because the very next day is the beginning of Nisan, or the beginning of the Jewish year. And Nisan is known as the month of miracles. We derive this from the Hebrew word nes, which means miracles, and nas, which means escape, or escape out of Egypt. The irony is that this is where it's going to cross. The path it's going to cross, it's actually called Little Egypt. So there's actually a connection. But this is marking spring. This is marking new life. This is marking something new. And so while I think that there's a lot of hints of a war and civil war and obviously an election this year, look, none of those things we can actually control. We can't control any of those factors. What we can't control is realizing God's plan and realizing what we're called to do. I want to take you back to the Star Spangled Banner. And what's interesting is that we only know the first stanza. We actually never read the entire poem that was written by Francis Scott Key. The first stanza, this is the national anthem. Oh, say, can you see, by the dawn's early light, what so proudly we hailed at twilight's last gleaming, whose bright stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight over the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming. And the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that Star-Spangled Banner yet wave over the land of the free and the home of the brave? This is stanza 2. On the shore dim seen through the mist of the deep, where the foe's haughty host in dread silence reposes, what is that which the breeze over the tower steep, as it fitfully blows, half concealed and half discloses? Now catches the gleam of the morning's first beam, in full glory reflected, now shines on the stream. 'Tis the Star-Spangled Banner, oh, long may it wave over the land of the free and home of the brave. This is the third stanza. And where is that band who so vauntly swore that the havoc of war and the battle's confusion a home and a country should leave us no more? The blood has washed out their foul footsteps' pollution. No refuge could save the hireling and the slave from the terror of flight or the gloom of the grave. And the Star-Spangled Banner in triumph doth wave over the land of the free and home of the brave. And the last stanza, which is actually the climax. Oh, thus be it ever when freemen shall stand between their loved homes and the war's desolation, blessed with victory and peace, may the heaven-rescued land praise the power that hath made and preserved us as a nation. Then conquer we must, for our cause is just, and this be our motto, in God is our trust. And the Star-Spangled Banner in triumph doth wave over the land of the free and the home of the brave. I just find that last stanza so encouraging, that God's got a prophetic plan and a destiny. And I just know what we're called to do. Many people are looking back and they're saying, I wish America was like it used to be. The Lord said in Matthew, says, he that looks back is not fit for the kingdom. Let's not look back. Let's look forward. If we have a true revival, if we have a true move of God, and we have a move like Jonah, because I believe that we could actually be going into something so prophetically significant. While everyone's trying to run and hide and they think they're going to get raptured out, I just don't see that right now. I still see quite a few things in prophecy that haven't been finished yet. And I also see the fact that I remember September 28th, 2015. It was the fourth blood red moon. It was in Jerusalem. I was overlooking, and when I got there, right around 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, all of a sudden buses started showing up on the Temple Mount, or not the Temple Mount, on the Mount of Olives, and I'm looking at the Temple Mount, and there was all these people dressed in linen garments. They actually had linen, and I looked and I said, so why is everyone dressed in white? He goes, oh, we're getting raptured tonight, and it just didn't happen. And I thought to myself, they were so focused on the rapture. And look, I believe there's a blessed hope. I'm not trying to dissuade anyone of that fact. I just think that we're called to focus on our job at hand. And if we're focused on our job at hand, then we're not going to get out of, we're not going to get out of whack. We're going to do what we're called to do. And, if we're going to see something happen in America, it has to be with a revival. If we don't have revival, there will not be in America. And so we should be praying and earnestly praying that God brings revival, that God brings restoration. And who knows whether or not God goes ahead and says, hey, we're here for another 40 years. And you say, well, I don't want to be here for. No one wants to. Everyone wants to be in heaven. I understand that. But God looks at the bigger picture. He looks at the billions of souls that need to come into the kingdom. That's the whole reason why he's waiting. He's not waiting because, he doesn't want to come and set up his kingdom. He's actually looking at the souls that need to come into the kingdom. And, if we're going to have the heart of God, we're going to have the heart of saying, hey, let's go ahead and reach. Let's be a witness, and let's go ahead and really know what our calling is. Listen, I really hope you enjoyed this episode. It really is, there's a lot of good things happening. I know that it looks very confusing. A lot of things are in and out of whack. That God's showing us all kinds of different signs, and he's trying to point out a lot of different things. At the same time, I think, in the middle of crisis is really our greatest opportunity. So let's stay focused on that. Until next time, if you haven't subscribed to our channel, sign up for our channel, subscribe to it, like the page, go to worthy.tv. If you're not on YouTube, worthy.tv has all of our videos, and it's hosted there as well. And if you don't get our Worthy Briefs, sign up for our Worthy Briefs. It's a daily devotion I send out along with the news, and we put together the news. I am really proud of the writing staff that we have. We have Stefan Boss in Budapest that knows multiple languages, and he's been a journalist for years. Karen Faulkner in Rome used to be someone at our congregation who, in Israeli that just loves the Lord, staying with her mom in Rome. And then we have journalists in Jerusalem and throughout the world, and we're just putting together the news truthfully. Just facts, so you know how to pray. So sign up for our Worthy Briefs. It's free. And don't forget to sign up for don't forget to go ahead and log into our Telegram channel. Look, until next time, be blessed. Know that God's got it under control. And until next time, this is George Whitten with Worthy News.